Welcome to Roundtable Mindset, the podcast where we seek to understand and share different perspectives in order to grow and challenge our own. And we encourage you, our guest, to do the same.
Each week we will pick a topic to discuss, sharing our own unique thoughts and insights. There will be times when we won't agree, and let's be real, that's probably going to be most of the time, and that's okay. We feel it's important to understand that we can live in this polarized world and still respect one another and even be friends.
Well, hello, and welcome back to Roundtable Mindset. This is Jamie.
And I'm Mahlon.
And we're back for another episode today of our exciting podcast. What?
I think we've said that the last few episodes, to be honest. I think we've kicked that can down the road enough.
Right.
People are probably like, enough already.
Whatever. It's not that exciting. You're just not that exciting.
Exactly. Maybe we're the ones that are not that exciting.
But it's okay that we think we are exciting. It's great. Anyway, how have you been?
I'm good. Staying busy. Just went to a college football game yesterday with a friend, so that was kind of nice. Staying busy at work, doing the dad thing on the weekends and the nights with the family. My daughter, who went to her senior homecoming last night, was kind of fun to see them all dressed up in their themed disco night attire. My son, who just went into high school, he's a freshman. He even went to the dance, which, that's out of his comfort zone for sure. So he really he dressed up and went to a dance and said he had a good time. We thought he would last maybe 15, 20 minutes. He was there for 2 hours. So we told him good job with that. So
that's awesome.
Yeah. So no, just doing the family thing. How about you?
Doing the family thing, except with, well, okay. As you know, I'm adjusting to life with no kids in the house, right?
Well, finally, yeah, you have all this free time now, and you and your significant other can just kind of do whatever you want to do. No responsibilities. Sounds awesome.
Yep. And then I had to have a puppy.
Oh.
So my boss told me she was proud of me. I waited a whopping 2 weeks, but I went and got a puppy last weekend. And it's been like 20 years since I have trained a puppy. And I absolutely forgot. I forgot so much so. So Friday, we brought puppy home. Everything was fantastic. Friday night, he just slept in my arms all night long. And Saturday, he was pretty chill and just sweet as can be. And then Saturday morning, somehow the raptor was released in the puppy and he was comfortable enough to show his true raptor colors.
I was just going to say he got comfortable. So he was feeling everybody out. And now he's like, okay, I can do this. Now you're really seeing his personality.
Yeah. And his personality is Stitch. I fully am expecting him to make a little model of San Francisco and terrorize his way through it because this is the puppy that I got. So Saturday I was kind of in tears almost. Okay, maybe I was in tears because I'm like, oh my God, he hates me. He just keeps biting everything. So thankfully I've got some good support in my family and was able to, I've gotten him pretty kennel chained. Okay. I mean, it's not perfect, but he's tiny still. So at least I can go to work because literally on Sunday, that's what happened. I saw my whole life and I was like, how am I ever going to work again? So,
well, we've had, again, not the experience that you're having, but we've had a little bit of experience with trying to, have a puppy in the house. And I tell you what, being able to lock them away in a kennel and that being legal is such a relief because, when you're raising kids, you can't put them in a kennel. And I've joked about that with my family before, but at least you have a little bit of reprieve that you can put them in the kennel and kind of keep them isolated and give you a sanity check every once in a while.
Well, and that is, I keep having to remind myself that the kennel is there to keep him safe as much as it is to keep me sane. So, but yes, kennel training is going okay. Potty training is going okay. But my goodness, he is an active little puppy. As a matter of fact, let me tell you this. I was laughing really hard last night when my watch notified me that I have doubled my amount of steps in the last 4 days than I had for the last year. And I was like, oh, okay. Because suddenly, like, all right, let's go for a walk, Cooper. Let's go do this, Cooper. so
I have to ask you, Jamie, were you afraid of having free time? Is that why the puppy's here? Or
no, I needed someone to love me unconditionally because I was lonely. So I needed someone to be excited when I walked in the door and want to snuggle in my lap. And I don't know. It's a good choice. I'm positive. And he will be a great puppy once we get through some of the things.
So his name is Cooper. I heard you say that. What breed is he?
His name is Cooper. He is 12 weeks old in a couple of days, and he is a purebred poodle. But I'm calling him my, this is terrible. I'm calling him my bargain basement puppy.
Well, that's loving.
Or my discount poodle. He didn't meet breed standards. He has a little bit of an underbite. And so he's a full bred poodle, but he's got a couple little imperfections. So
well, don't we all?
Yeah, exactly. My daughter was appalled that this was a practice of breeders, but
well, welcome, Cooper. I'm very happy for you, Jamie, and I'm happy that you brought a little bundle of fur. What do they call them now? Fur babies? Is that what they call them? Into your house that you can love, and they can love you unconditionally.
Yep. Hopefully, after he quits destroying my house. Yes. Oh, see.
So I actually have a little bit of a food for thought topic that I'll go ahead and just kind of jump into, if you don't mind. So something at work happened this week that kind of got my brain, churning. That seems to happen quite a bit when there's situations at work and I have a pen and paper and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to write this down because I think this is something, I don't know if I'm experiencing or, just myself or if other people are experiencing, but I had kind of one of those moments this week. And without getting into it, we had a lot of things happening at work behind the scenes that were causing some things not to go smooth. In IT, we move things from lower environments where we're coding it up until the production environment or into the highest environment. And all of that came grinding to a halt because of an IT issue. And then on top of that, we were having to plan out the next 12 weeks of work, which in my job, that's a PI planning session. So we had that PI planning session. We have IT grind to a halt. We can't get things out the door for business. And I started looking and analyzing everything that I've done leading up to that week, everything into that week. I started looking down the path of what's next week bringing up. Am I prepared for it? What could I be prepared for? So my brain was just kind of spinning. And I started really criticizing myself, criticizing my work, the things that I was doing, the things that I was trying to plan for. I even went as far as criticizing myself for things that I knew were outside of my control, but was I prepared for them as much as I needed to be? So here was my question for food for thought, Jamie. And it made me think. I was doing a lot of self-criticizing, and I just knew that my boss would be having the same thoughts about me. And so they were criticizing me kind of along the way. So when I had my meeting with my boss, come to find out, he was not thinking in any of those terms that I was thinking about. He was not doing any kind of criticizing of Mahlon's work or things that I was planning for. So here's where my question comes in. Have you ever criticized yourself on behalf of somebody else?
That's a really interesting way to ask that question, because it's funny. We just talked about this with the staff that I work with at work not too long ago, and we kind of call it like negative self-talk, and like calling out how often we are our own worst critics, right? Like when I do something and I'm going back and reflecting on that something, how I am so much more critical of myself and I'm hard on myself when others might not be nearly so disparaging about what I said or what I did or whatever. And I feel like that kind of defines the human condition. Aren't we usually like most hard on ourselves, or we put these unrealistic expectations on ourselves when that isn't exactly what's being put on us from other people? So yes, I when you asked me that question to begin with, when you kind of told me what you wanted to talk about, I was like, I don't even get what you're talking about. But as you explain it, it's interesting to me, because it's almost like you're putting the moral ahead of the story. Like, it's funny to think of it that way, that I'm criticizing myself on someone else's behalf. Seems kind of silly, doesn't it? Just kind of calls it out in a different way.
Well, and it's kind of, what's interesting is when it was all said and done, I built up this thing in my mind, and I was putting together contingency plans. I was thinking ahead of what I needed to do to solve the problems. I was trying to anticipate what my boss was going to say to me. So I was criticizing everything that I was doing or not doing or should have done differently. And so my stress levels were going up. In addition to everything that I mentioned that was going on at work, now I also have this thought of my boss is really not going to be happy with my performance, and he's really going to be looking at all the things that I should have been doing and calling them out. So I was trying to prepare and kind of get ahead of that. What was shocking to me, the realization that came over me, is when I had that one-on-one with him, his focus was not me at all. He had no criticism of me at all. Yes, some of the things going on in IT he wished wasn't happening, but he didn't attribute those to me. So that's where this thought process came that said, here I am criticizing myself. Some of it is my own, but some of it is I just knew my boss was having some of the same criticisms about me. And I mentioned earlier that I went to a football game with a friend yesterday. And so I kind of brought this up and asked him and his son the same question. And he said something, I can't remember exactly what he said, but here's the moral of it was, where you were trying to get ahead of your boss, criticizing yourself. So when your boss brought it up, you already are like, yes, I'm aware of that, and here's what I'm doing to fix it. And that's exactly what I was doing. I was trying to get ahead of what I knew my boss was going to want to talk to me about. So then I could go to him and say, here's everything that I'm seeing that needs to change, that I need to work on. And I'm bringing it to you before you can bring it to me, because I want you to see how proactive I am and that I'm aware that this needs to be done. And I understand that you're not happy with me. So look at everything that I'm recognizing and I'm also planning for. And it's almost a way of saying, before you even told me there was a problem, I recognized it and fixed it. And when he was talking to me about that, that's exactly what I was doing. And then to find out that my boss wasn't even thinking in those terms, I don't want to say it was a waste of time, but there was obviously a lot more stress that I was putting on myself that I didn't need to be. And when I was talking with my friend, he was, his name's Aaron. Aaron was saying, he could relate to that. And I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who can relate to that. And so it's so different when I know I take a step back and think I was criticizing myself for somebody else because I just knew they were seeing it the same way that I was. And that wasn't the case. And all that time, just this last week that I spent putting all that pressure on me that didn't need to be there.
Well, and you said it wasn't really a waste of time. But at the same time, what a waste of energy. You know what I mean? Like, you wasted so much energy on stressing about it and prepping for it. And in all actuality, some of those things might just be part of the process, and it's expected that some of those shortfalls will come. And we are only one person, right? I mean, we can't juggle everything. And so, yeah, that I do see that as when I do that, that's exactly what it is. It's wasted energy. It's me, spending so much time worrying about X, Y, and Z that I could be doing something about A, B, and C, right? So,
well, and when you have that stress on you, at least for me, everything else starts getting exasperated. So suddenly taking notes from a meeting, which I do all the time, suddenly became, oh my goodness, am I capturing enough? Then that self-doubt starts coming into other areas to be like, did I write the right story? Am I talking to the business about the right things? And if I would have just taken a moment and found a way to kind of bring down that stress level that I was putting on myself because I was criticizing myself on the behalf of my boss, that's kind of where it leaks into the other aspects of my life and my day. And I know I'm relating this to my job because that's where it happened last week. But I'm also wondering in people's personal lives, like sometimes do you criticize yourself because your spouse is thinking the same thing, or your in-laws or your parents or your siblings or, a good friend? I mean, whatever it is, I think that happens more and more. And the more I think about this, the more it's like, is that common? Is that something that everybody does to an extent? Or is that just something that, because of my personality, that's what I start doing for myself, and I need to work through that?
Oh, I know I do it all over the place. I do it with my partner. I know that he is absolutely disappointed in something that I did or didn't do. And then I find out that it wasn't a big deal, or he didn't even notice, or, you know what I mean? I think that that's something that comes up for me a lot. And the more I do that, the more I notice or recognize that I do that, the bigger those things get and the more often it happens. And so, I think something I often talk about, and I think I've even talked about it here quite a few times, is giving myself some grace, right? And I feel like I feel like 90% of the time I get more grace from other people than I'm ever willing to give myself. And those kind of times remind me like, okay, Jamie, you are a human being and all you can do is give it your best. And if you've given it your best, then, tomorrow's a new day and you can do it all over again. And I don't have to be so critical on myself or think that I'm failing in every area or something. 'Cause I feel like that's when it's the worst, is when I'm feeling like, I'm suck. I suck everywhere. Like I suck at home. I suck at work. I suck with training a puppy. I suck, whatever. It just gets worse and worse. So yeah, I think that's where that self-grace comes in for me a lot.
So one thing I'm challenging myself going forward with this is I'm going to stop assuming that my self-criticism is also shared with people in my life and at my work. So if I had to go back to next week, I would probably say, here are things that I want to work on, but I shouldn't just automatically attribute those are the same things my boss is expecting me to work on. Or I'm not criticizing, or I might be criticizing myself on a couple elements, but I shouldn't just assume that other people are also criticizing me for the same elements. Unless there is conversation and evidence of something like that, I need to learn to say, okay, I may want to internalize that myself and work on a few things and try to prep, but don't just assume that this is what other people are criticizing me for until there's evidence. And that's going to be hard for me because I naturally just automatically know that I'm seeing it, other people are seeing it. And I'm finding out that sometimes that's not the case. As you said, we're our own worst critics. And so sometimes I have myself under a magnifying glass when other people haven't even, glanced over at me yet. So understanding that and working through it and practicing it is going to be a challenge for me, but that's what I'm going to start doing at least. So
yes, that's a really good practice. And, I think too, what it kind of makes me think of is it's funny that you talked about how you prepped for like, okay, I did recognize it and this is what we're going to do different moving forward. And this is how I'm going to fix this. And this is how I'm going to fix that. And truthfully, I think sometimes that input from others, if it really is a criticism that they have to bring to us, that input from others is how we grow ourselves and think outside the box and don't do it the way that we would always do it, which may be leading to why we're feeling so self-critical. So, getting that feedback, and maybe not criticism, because I can maybe count, I can count a handful of times where it's actually been criticism and it hasn't been constructive feedback. You know what I mean? Like, I am critical. My boss is typically just providing me some reflection and feedback, right? So, what a good food for thought. Thanks for bringing that.
Yeah, no worries. So the topic that we have today is I think it's interesting. Again, it kind of came from a conversation that I was having this weekend with my friend Aaron and his son, Isaac. And I wanted to have that with you and everybody else here because I thought it was such an interesting conversation. In fact, we were talking about it and somebody, some stranger kind of came up to the table and said, "Hey, I couldn't help but overhear what you guys were talking about. And I thought I heard one of you say you have a podcast. I really want to tune in and see how this ends because I find it really interesting." And so I thought, okay, this might be something that other people might want to weigh in on. So, Jamie, I wanted to get your opinion on something, and I'm going to start the conversation with the same question I started there, with Aaron and Isaac. I tried to combine their names there. So do you think, or do you believe that children have rights?
Is that really a question? Yes, children have rights.
Well, now, okay. And you went exactly where we started off to, was like, okay, and we're done, put a period in it.
Right.
Now.
We're done with our podcast. Thanks, guys. See you next time.
And that was really lovely. Thank you. No, and again, that's kind of what happened too. But what we're trying to say is, and I asked his son, who just recently turned 18, and I said, what do you think? And, I can't remember all of the exact conversation, but basically I think what came out of what he was trying to say was, there are a lot of times as a child, do you really have the rights that are guaranteed to you or guaranteed to you as an adult? And I think where he was going with that was, if you think about it, a child can't enter into an agreement with anybody. They are not able to sign a contract. Mm-hmm. They have no, financial responsibilities for things that they do, or either an accidental or on purpose of what they cause. Freedom of speech. I mean, as a parent, we're constantly trying to tell them, how to kind of fall in line, and we give them guidelines and guide rails. Even into the school, we start talking about, if you have freedom of speech. There was a time when we were in high school, there was a certain shirt that you couldn't wear because they had some innuendos in them. I'm thinking, just for your benefit, Jamie, the Big Johnson shirts.
Okay. I was like, okay, wait a second. I like on the tip of my tongue, but I couldn't remember. Yes, I do remember Big Johnson shirts. Oh
so, and there were some schools that
we thought we were so cool. Can we just reflect on that for a second?
Well, they some of them were pretty awesome T-shirts.
We thought we were so smart. Like, look at us. Yeah.
Well, again, as kids do, we were trying to get as close to that line without crossing over, right? Like, there was no real words on a page around these types of shirts before, and so of course kids grab. Like, I owned a couple of them myself, and I was like, these are awesome. But I digress. So yeah, those are the types of things we come up, and then we start talking about that and say, okay, do children really have the freedom of speech? Because, and now hang in there. This was part of the conversation. And I'm not a proponent of bullying, but you even talk about today, there's all these anti-bullying things in school where even kids can no longer say things to other children. So you may not even have to put your hands on anyone now. You can say the most horrible, vile things to somebody, and now there's real consequence to it. And so in the adult world, if I said whatever was on my mind and I used my words, that's freedom of speech. You don't have to like somebody for it. You don't have to agree with what they said, but you can't argue that they have the right to say whatever they want to say. But when you talk about kids and you talk about their environment and, their job being the school, it doesn't seem like they have the same rights as what we have in being an adult.
Well, I think There's a difference between right and responsibility, right? So I just said right like 3 times and make that 4 in the
Right? Are you
same
sure?
sentence.
Right?
I mean, like, right? But no, there's a difference between a right and a responsibility. So our kids definitely do not have the responsibility of things like entering a contract or financial decisions or things like that. But I think that, I mean, if you think about the way our laws are structured, there are punishable crimes by not providing for and protecting your children's rights. You know what I mean?
Not really. I think what you're trying to say, or here's how I'm hearing that, is your child's rights. I'm talking more of a. Are you talking about providing for them versus the rights they have as underneath, like freedom of speech, right to bear arms, that kind of stuff? Like, I'm trying to understand what that comment was.
Well, some of those kind of, for instance, if you do not send your child to school and you do not provide for your child's education, do you know what happens?
No, I don't. I'm going to say no, I don't.
Okay, so in my area, the school files a complaint with the county attorney, and the county attorney sends the truancy officer to your door because it's illegal not to educate your child. Your child has a legal right to an education. If you do not provide your child with shelter and physical safety and food and medical care, you can be charged with abuse and neglect, because our children have a right to a safe environment where they're provided shelter and healthcare and food. So, I think our kids have rights.
Well, they have basic needs that are met. I don't know if I would call those, in the context that we were having, I don't know if I would call those rights. I was thinking more along the lines of, they have the freedom of speech. They have all these different things that we have as an adult. I think freedom of speech is probably the one that makes the most sense, just because, again, what came up was like anti-bullying. Whereas if we had a job, it would be the same thing as if we had a job and we said something to a coworker. Now, again, I understand there's certain degrees, but let's just say it's like, hey, I don't really like you for a variety of reasons, whatever. And that person perceived you as bullying, and they went and told the HR office, and then you were either fired or you were, asked to leave the premises for a while until an investigation. To me, that's, you really can't come back on somebody on what they said from a freedom of speech perspective. And do the kids that aren't adults, do they have the same rights? Are they covered by the same, constitutional rights that we are as an adult?
It's interesting, and without diving into diving into the First Amendment and the freedom of speech and things like that, the freedom of speech is not, it's more about like, we have the freedom to protest the government, to say what we want to say, and we can't be persecuted by the government for that. That's kind of my understanding of freedom of speech. But your speech can't be harmful to another person. You know what I mean? Like you can't make threats to another person. And so, I don't know. I mean, maybe that's splitting hairs, but
and I actually agree with you. Like, I think if there's a real threat, like if you really threaten someone to say, hey, I'm going to come and blow up your house, to me, there's different degrees, right? Like that to me is you're telling them there's harm coming to them. I'm going to do something to you. And I think that's different. The example that we were using that kind of starts touching on this was the whole anti-bullying. Like there are times when kids are just not nice to each other. And we've talked about that previously. And there's times when adults are not. But right now, and I can think about, I think, Isaac's school that I was talking to, my kids' school, I'm sure your kids' school also had a kind of an anti-bullying, which is not a bad thing. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. But what I'm saying is there are consequences that are coming to these kids because of what they're saying. And sometimes what people are saying, it's kids being kids, or it's some kid not being able to work through their own emotions, so they're taking it on someone else. Doesn't make it right, but that's kind of where it's happening. Well, when I was a kid, there was nothing that was done for you. Well, now you could be suspended from school. You can go to the principal's office. You can be isolated from your classmates. You could be in school suspended for what you're saying. And it really started making me think that says, okay, but if you just say something, that is now something that can be punished. You are punished by what you say. And so to me, they don't have the same freedom of communication and speech that we do as an adult. Because I've been at work where I've said something to somebody else and they didn't like it, but nothing happened to me, nothing happened to them. We just didn't, like each other, and we went our separate ways. So to me, I feel like we're getting more of those freedoms, and people are understanding that we have the right to say what we want to say as long as it's not putting physical hands on anybody, that kids aren't seeing that anymore or don't have that option anymore. And that kind of snowballed into other areas of where kids have rights. And, when I first went into that question with them, I wanted to say, yes, they have the same rights as everybody else. But the more we were talking, the more I'm like, but do they? Because kids are just the reflection of their parents or the guardians that have them. So if they do something wrong, that comes back on the parents. If there's something that they do financially that they need money from, they don't go to the child, they come to the parents. So it's almost like kids underneath this conversation are extensions of their parents. They're not even recognized as being their own person.
Well, I think in some ways that's absolutely true, because you can't put responsibilities on a 10-year-old for making sound decisions when their brain isn't fully developed, right? They have not learned how to make those decisions. So it has to go back to someone. And of course it goes back to the parents. But at the same time, again, I feel like a lot of that is responsibilities. When you talk about things like, especially in the legal world, yeah, they go back, it defaults to mom and dad. And some of that might be because, mom and dad need to pay closer attention to what's being said on the phone, or, what texts are going back and forth, or what they're doing on the Amazon, and not, not buying a whole bunch of stuff that they can't really pay for. And that, to me, that makes sense. But when we talk about rights of children, yeah, they have basic human rights just like everyone else. You know what I mean?
Well, and, they have the right to be cared for, and you can't, hurt a child. Like, all of that, I completely agree. I also don't know, though, at this point of time now, if you can say they have the same constitutional rights as an adult.
Well, I don't think they do, but I don't think that the Constitution, I get in this conversation and the way we're talking about it, I don't think they do. But I think that's because, the Constitution, the rights that we get for the Constitution also come with as responsibilities, right? It's not just rights. It's also responsibilities that as a citizen, I am going to uphold the community standards set out by law. I'm going to pay my debts. I'm going to do, whatever. Those things are, there's rights and responsibilities. It's a two-edged, a double-sided coin, I guess. And depending upon the state, like in my state, kids don't reach the age of majority until they're 19. But as far as federal standards go, 18 is when a kid becomes an adult. That's when they can enlist in the military, and that's when they can vote, and that's when they can do all of these other things. And so I guess in that way, do they have the same rights as adults? No, but it's our job as adults to protect and provide them with the rights that are responsible to give to them.
Absolutely agree. And I think something else that you said, though, was rights and responsibilities. And I would almost say as a child, there are no expectations for a child to have the same rights and or responsibilities of an adult. And so, again, the closer you get to a child being born, that's where it makes sense, right? Like to you, I think you use the 10-year-old. Of course, you're not going to expect a 10-year-old to be able to do so. But when you start talking about as close as it gets to that line where they become an adult, and it's really interesting that you kind of picked up on that, because that was another, kind of avenue that we went down was in my state, at 18, you're an adult. And so what that means is my daughter, who will be 18 in a couple months, she's her senior year in high school. She will start off the senior year as a minor and she will end as an adult.
Mm-hmm.
And so what does that mean when that transition happens? And, you know, one of the things that I've noticed, I'm already starting to get notified from my insurance company, is that once my daughter hits the age of 18, I no longer have access to her medical records. I no longer have access to anything HIPAA related. I can't even schedule an appointment because the app that I use that my insurance company provides for me will remove her off of there automatically. In fact, I think there's a countdown that has me going to when Madison is no longer, even though she's on.
Thank you for that.
Even though she's on my insurance, it's like, yeah, now she has to download this app and she has to do everything herself. But thank you very much.
But keep sending us the money.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, we're not going to bother her because we know that, you know, she's just starting out. You keep paying us, but you can't know anything about it.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah.
So we have that. Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
Well, and that is an interesting thing. And I'm kind of grateful that our state left it like it has it at 19, because then my kids were both graduated. They turned 18 just before they graduated. So it was like, nope, they were still minors. There was no question about what responsibilities or rights they had, because it was still my responsibility to make sure that their basic human rights were met. But it was also that year gave us such a great space to practice being an adult. You know what I mean? Although in my state, the age is 19, you know, there were some systems that already had started cutting me off from being able to interact with them regarding my kids and their care. So for instance, my daughter's a type 1 diabetic, and so she has technology and supplies and things that she is reliant on to live. And when she turned 18, all of a sudden her medical supply company said they couldn't talk to me anymore. Well, they're based out of Florida and I live several states away. And in their books and according to them, the age is 18. And once that youth is 18, then they can't talk to the parent anymore. So then we had to have Hannah give authorization for them to talk to me about ordering her supplies and things. But it was like, I mean, that was kind of the beginning of that shift for me as a mom. And to be able to have that year to adjust to that was really good. It also made it so that I had to be really intentional with my children to say, okay, look, here's the deal. When this happens, if you want me to be able to help you by talking to your doctor, if you want me to be able to help you by even setting up an appointment, you're going to have to give them permission to talk to me, or else you're going to have to do this stuff on your own. And so it's amazing how many authorizations got signed right around the age of their 19th birthday, so that I could continue to support them in doing those things. Although I'm surprised I haven't had to a whole lot, but yeah, I think I kind of wish every state did it that way, because it really was helpful, I think, for us to be able to have that extra leeway. And there wasn't, I mean, I can't imagine trying to tell my seniors in high school, well, sorry, you're on your own. Good luck. If you need any help with that appointment, I guess you can call them and then call me as well. Like, you know what I mean?
Well, and where you're a little bit different, like, it's so weird because my brain is like splitting in half. Where your state, they're not considered an adult until they're 19. I'd almost want to say that's the best world from a going to school perspective, because like you said, they're a minor basically from the time they come in until they leave that senior year. So it all kind of stays the same. What's weird is that your daughter's like medical place stopped talking to you at 18, even though your state doesn't recognize them being an adult till 19, but I won't go into that. But in my state, halfway down the year, suddenly my daughter, who was a minor, is no longer a minor. Well, what does that mean? And
I was going to say, if you want, I can tell you a little bit about what I've seen that mean here in Nebraska. Because,
in your state?
Yeah, in my state. What is my deal today? Anyway, I can tell you a little bit about what
Jamie's
that looks
address.
like.
Jamie's address is the following.
I can tell you a little bit about what that looks like in my state, because I have worked with some families. What's interesting is that, like, if an 18-year-old commits a crime, when it comes to the legal system, they are an adult. So they are charged for a crime as an adult at 18, even though they haven't reached the age of majority. They can leave the house. Legally, I cannot keep them in my home any longer after the age of 18, but I can't kick them out until they're 19. Like, there's some weird dichotomy in that too.
Well, and before you go too far down the path, I want to stop you right there where you said about committing a crime, because that was something that came up in my conversation with my friend yesterday too. Was, there are times when someone who's, I've seen as young as 13, 13, 14, 15, crime cases where the crime that was committed by this youth was so heinous that the courts have decided we're going to try you as an adult because it was just such a horrible crime. Mm-hmm. And so that was an avenue that we started talking about too. It's like, when can some of these agencies, government, legal systems, whoever we're going to talk about, at what point can they take discretion to say, yes, legally this child is a minor and we've acknowledged the types of responsibilities and rights that these minors have, but guess what? We can then impose upon them the same sentencing and the same consequences for their actions as an adult. To me, there feels like there's a gray area there, but I don't know when you'd have a gray area versus when these rights are imposed versus when they're not imposed, because it doesn't seem like it's consistent across the board. It's almost situational. And I guess in my mind, as a parent, if I stopped and think about all these things, I'm like, yeah, I guess some places get to pick and choose if they're going to treat them as a minor or as an adult. That doesn't seem right or fair. But then as a parent, I want them to I'm raising them to be an adult, but there's a point in time in which that adultness, I'm using air quotes, that adulthood begins. And until that moment, they're not looked at from myself as an adult. They don't have the same rights and they don't have the same responsibilities and they don't have the same consequences because they're not an adult. But yet that doesn't seem to be happening across the board. I feel like I'm rambling now, but do you get my point?
I do. And what's interesting is I think there are states where crimes against children are charged and punished differently than crimes against an adult. So, I think that there are states that are behind when it comes to recognizing the value and importance that we should be placing on our children. And then there are places I'm sure that are excelling in that and are doing a great job at making sure that that children are treated with the honor and respect they should be treated, because they are young and vulnerable, and doing that well and consistently. So I do think, just like I feel like everything we talk about, it's such a varied landscape when it comes to what this looks like in different areas. I think it makes it hard to say, hey, what do, as a nation, what do we need to do? It always helps me bring it back to what can I do to influence in my space, right? Because I can't do anything about what happens in, Georgia or something.
Right. And yeah, I'm not even to the part where we would say circle of influence, circle of control yet for me. But it's just around the fact of there seems to be all these, it's not as concrete as I've always thought it was in my mind. I'm raising these children. I know they're going to be of age. In our state, that age is 18. I didn't even think far enough ahead to say, okay, that's going to happen halfway in their senior year of high school. Because then the natural questions come out is, we owe financially for our kids going to school. There's fees, and there's from the school, there's book fees, and there's show choir fees, and there's all these different things that get tacked up and that need to be paid every year. Well, again, going back to rights and responsibilities, is it still the parent's responsibility to then cover that for the kid? I think for for the sake of the kid, parents would do that. So I'm not saying they can't pay for that on behalf of their kids. But from a school's perspective, do they look at that and say, okay, parents, the remainder of this bill is no longer your responsibility. It's now your child's because they became an adult. And if they don't look at that in that way, then it starts making me question, well, when do these kids start getting looked at as an adult? And it seems like it's gray. Your state has the age of majority being 19. It sounds like there's some things that happen to them when they're 18. There's some things that happen to them when 19. My state, it's only 18. But again, once I sat down and really start thinking about it, and I have a kid that's about to cross that line, it really starts asking those questions of, is that when their rights and those are when the responsibilities happen? And where at in their life does that really make sense? And after everything that we've just talked about, the other point that keeps nagging in the back of my head is that we all have heard that children's brains don't finish forming or developing until their early 20s. I think, was it 24, 25?
Yep.
So now we're making kids become adults and thrusting responsibility and adulthood on them when they're not even finished, their brain hasn't finished developing or growing. It just adds all these different questions. And I'm sure if you go back in the record books, you hear old timey stories where there's like 14-year-olds getting married and starting a house. And you look at that and you go, oh my goodness. And I know at 18, people can go in the military and serve for the country. And that's a very honorable thing to do. And to me, that's because they're now considered an adult. But then is the light switch approach really the approach we should take? Is there really just one moment you're a child and the next moment you're an adult?
Well, and imagine if your daughter decided whenever she turns 18 here in the next month or two, hey, my best friend and I who turned 18 last month are going to go get an apartment. Thanks for everything. See you later. Right? But then they're still in high school. So does the school call you to report her absence? Do they call you to say, hey, she's been tardy 5 days in a row? And what does that look like? That is an interesting question for me because that wasn't something that we had to really experience. I do remember, this was a couple years ago. I was visiting with a clinician who also teaches at our local university. And he was telling me about how he had read an article a study that had showed that college freshmen going into college, and this was just before the pandemic. So college freshmen going in their first year of college were about 5 years less mature than they were just 15 or 20 years ago. And so if you think about college campuses with 18-year-olds who are 5 years less mature, you've got a whole bunch of 13-year-olds running around college campuses with all of the freedoms and rights in the world afforded to any of us, right? And that, to me, and even if I think back to my parents, my mom had me shortly after she turned 20 years old, right? I mean, and now a lot of these kids are waiting to have babies until they're 30. You know what I mean? But it's like my parents, when I look back at my parents, my dad had a full-time job and he was ready to support a family and he was, you know what I mean? It is a difference, I think, in maturity now that it feels like handing over this light switch idea is a little scary when we're talking about handing that over to kids who really aren't maybe as mature as 18-year-olds used to be when we were 18. You know what I mean?
I do, and I recognize that we can't put a solution in that's going to fix all the problems. I get that, and some kids at 18 are ready to go. I think my daughter's going to be one of them. She's pretty responsible. She has a pretty good head on her shoulders. The issue that I have is just the matter of when you become an adult in your life. Sometimes I feel like not sometimes, I can see where it would make sense to have a light switch because suddenly they've hit an age that, the law has now said they are considered an adult. There's HIPAA laws that come in that now I no longer have access, all of those things. Like I understand that it has to start somewhere. But what concerns me is the fact that when in their life does that happen? Your state, like I said, it makes a lot more sense to me to say 19, because then I know at least they're out of high school. Most of the time, if you're going to go on to higher education, you go into college, into a university, you're into a campus, and you kind of get that the ease into being on your own, right? Because you're still in a confined space. You still almost have an apartment. You have a community that you can start tapping into, versus those kids that don't want to go on to that next higher education and they leave home. They go into what? Suddenly they've had this family structure. They've had this community, and now suddenly they have lost all of that and they're by themselves. And oh, by the way, the cost of living is super expensive, and now you're expected to do all of these things right out of the gate. Again, it's just, there's parts of me that I'm like, I can see why it has to be that way. And then there's parts of me that's like, it doesn't make sense where kids are at, that suddenly they're just looked at as now you're an adult and you have all the rights and responsibilities that adults have. So that was one thing. The other thing I want to bring up to you, Jamie, before I begin, do you have anything to respond to that? I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay, so the other aspect of this was, which I thought was really interesting, is there are times when kids get emancipated from their parents for a variety of reasons. Mm-hmm. And when that emancipation happens, the way I understood it, and I don't know if you have a different view on this or not, but I'm just going to share with how I thought this happened. Emancipation was basically the law looking at this child as saying, you are no longer considered an adult. You no longer need any other guardians. You can be responsible for yourself. Therefore, you are now, in the eyes of the law, you are now considered an adult. And I've heard kids being emancipated, I think 16 is the youngest I remember hearing, 16, 17. But in that regard, now suddenly in the eyes of the law, they are now their own entity and they're their own person, as their own adult, and maybe not their own person was the right word, but you get my point. Like they're now considered an adult, and all these responsibilities and all of these rights are now thrust upon them. That seems a little weird too. So when we were working through the conversation and that came up, it's like, holy smokes, now we have the ability to just wave our hands and stamp a document and say, yep, you're now an adult, because of not of the maturity level, not because of even your age. It's because of circumstances and the fact the government, somebody said, hey, you're now an adult. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Well, it's weird that I know about these things. My children did not emancipate themselves. However, because of my work, I've learned a few things about these things. That's why I understand. But, in order for a youth to be able to go to a court and ask for emancipation, they have to be able to prove that they can care for themselves. They have to be able to prove that they can meet their financial needs and provide for themselves, and take care of the expenses that they would accrue as an adult. They have to be able to say, yes, I'm capable of caring for myself as an adult. And that is, that's a lot different than just like, oh, sure. Okay. You're in a crappy spot. Everything sucks. So let's see if you can do it better. You know what I mean? These are youth that have worked really hard to show, like, yes, I can go to school and I can maintain my grades and I can carry a full-time job so that I can pay for the apartment that I plan to have. You know what I mean? So there is some responsibility on a youth to prove that. And to me, that's a skill level above where my kids were at 17. I don't know that they could have gone to a judge and said, hey, look, this is what I'm doing to make sure that I can care for myself. They enjoyed the spoils of being in my home and not having to do those things. You know what I mean?
Yes. And this kind of led us into another segment, which is, what about change of guardianship? So when they're a minor, if something happens with the parents, or there's, I don't know if an abuse case would come into this, but there's a place in which they want to change who is responsible for them. So maybe their parents aren't the best guardians, so they change, and now an aunt and uncle or a grandparent is now legally responsible for them. That's kind of where the conversation went. But let me ask you this question. What about, and I think it's conservatorship, maybe that's not the right word, but
Are we
where I'm
going to
trying
talk
to
about
go
Britney
is,
Spears?
I don't want to talk about Britney Spears, but let's talk about adults that have to have somebody become a guardian for them when they're already an adult. And for whatever reason, does that make that individual less of an adult or responsibility? Does that turn an adult back into a child if they have to have that layer of guardianship over them?
Well, I think that exists for vulnerable adults who aren't able to, who aren't able to fulfill those responsibilities or exercise those rights because they're incapable of doing so. And that also requires a massive amount of proof to be taken to a court and a court to decide that that's appropriate. So, I mean, yeah, I think that in some ways, yeah, that probably is how that feels. But at the same time, it has to be proven to a court that that's necessary, because it's definitely not the first choice of a court to say, sorry, you don't have the right to decide how to spend your money. You need a guardian to help you do that. But as far as youth picking their guardian, I don't have a ton of experience in that way. Typically, when I have seen that, well, and I almost became a guardian for one of the youth that we fostered. And that was more through like an abuse neglect case where, the youth wasn't able to go back home. And so they were asking us to do guardianship, and then we ended up finding a better situation for him to go and get guardianship. But I don't have I don't have any knowledge or experience in whether a kiddo can say, hey, this situation isn't working for me. I would like a different guardian. I feel like courts are pretty heavily involved with that to make sure that parents' rights are being protected too.
Well, and I was talking more of along the lines of, if there was an abuse case or some reason why the parents were unfit, because maybe they're not directly, doing anything with the child, but maybe they're neglecting them or whatever. So that's what I was kind of talking about. Not that a kid can just, hey, I no longer want to live with my parents. I'd like to live with my aunt. But changing of the guardianship is something that we kind of just touched on briefly as well. The other thing that really bothers me, and now this is a dad talking to you, so I just want that to be clear, it is going to drive me absolutely nuts that after my child, and again, I have to fall back to how we raise them, so I'm not saying that this is going to happen, but there is nothing stopping my kid now at 18 if they want to get whatever they want pierced, if they want to get a tattoo. There's no longer another layer of protection for my child from themselves they don't even have to talk to me anymore. And so that is something that I'm overcoming. So when we were talking through all of, this yesterday, I couldn't help but, think about, well, there's nothing I can do to stop my child anymore. There's nothing that I can do to prevent them from not making their own decisions. I mean, I can talk to them, and we've spent years parenting them. So hopefully those things are in place. But that is a hard pill to swallow, that literally the night before she turns 18, I have that. The next day I don't. Again, the light switch thing. Why does it have to be a light switch?
Oh, Mahlon. That is probably, yeah, that was a big, big eye opener for me. Now, here's an interesting thing. In my state, although they can't, although I am still responsible for them through the age of 19, if they want to go get a piercing, they can do that at 18. Like, they don't need me to do that. So we really,
I don't understand that. Like, I don't understand your state. If it's just some things that are 19, that's really confusing.
Mm-hmm. It
really confusing.
Is. But at the same time, it also is like training wheels. It was like adulting light, right? Like, at the end of the day, I could elbow my way into spaces that were important and needed to be elbowed into. But it also gave them that safety net to be able to try out some of these adulting things. As a matter of fact, my kids, like I said, both of them turned 19 or 18 just before graduation, and they respected the no tattoo or piercing, like, other than my daughter's ears, but the no tattoos or other piercings until after graduation. And so literally 2 days after graduation, I'm positive some of their graduation money went to getting piercings and their first tattoos. But
Hey, they waited at least.
But they waited till they were 19 or waited till they graduated. So, but no, I think it did give us that gray space. It was adulting with training wheels. It was kind of a nice space. And they, they knew that they had a safe space to be. Now, a month after my son turned 19, he was moving into his own apartment. So, that was kind of, because he was ready. He was needing the ability to make those decisions for himself. And thankfully, because it was 19, it was an extra year, I was ready to give him that and not feeling like, this is weird. Yesterday and today, suddenly, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And I just want to, the way that we've raised our children, we've instilled in them responsibilities that training wheels have started years before we're at right now. So we're having to lean on the fact that all of that work that we've put into them, all of that knowledge we put into them. But I guess I'm going to speak for myself because my wife's not here. What I need to get comfortable with is that now they are taking those tools, and my daughter is going to be taking all those experiences and the knowledge that I gave her, and she's now going to be able to implement what she wants to implement rather than what we're telling her she has to implement. And some of that is me just getting comfortable with her being an adult. Yep. And I recognize that. As I'm looking into your eyes, Jamie, I recognize that. It is extremely hard. And I know our conversation here kind of went all over the place, and we've kind of covered a lot of area, which I appreciate. But it's so interesting when we talk about this, especially, we started off with everything that has to do with rights and responsibilities on a child. Are they the same as adults? No, they're not. But then all the different ways that they can be changed or altered or looked on, and then all of a sudden a magic day happens and it's all on their shoulders, and all of the responsibilities, all of the decisions, everything now is 100% theirs. It's just a wild ride. So I think our conversation kind of just mirrors that whole process of a child, a minor turning into an adult, and all the different aspects that have to be impacted. It's a huge area, and one that, quite frankly, up until yesterday and even today, I didn't really think a whole lot through. I have had kids. I knew there was going to be a point in time when I wouldn't be responsible for them anymore, and I knew they would be an adult. But when you start getting closer to that line, I start asking all these questions like, well, wait a minute. It just magically happens. I'm iced out immediately. Like, what? That seems crazy,
Well, and it's funny how some days you're really looking forward to the day that you're no longer responsible. And then other days you're like, oh, hold on now. Like, let's slow down just a little bit. But no, I think what's been encouraging to me is that I do think when my kids turned 18 and then 19, I did see spaces where I don't know that I had done a well enough job preparing them for all the things, right? Like I did what I could to give them skills and things like that. But even now, I'm not sure either one of my kids could write a check if they had to, because everything is so electronic, you know what I mean? But I don't know that they have to write checks because everything is electronic. They can pay their rent electronically, that kind of stuff. So there's pieces that I don't know that they can do. But what I have really been thankful for is that that I have enough of a relationship with my kids where they feel safe to come and ask when they don't know what to do or how to handle something. So even though they may not have all the skills yet, I still feel like they've got some training wheels because they always have me to come back to, and I've seen them do it. They've trusted my. I didn't even tell you this. My daughter took a trip. She wanted to go to IKEA. So they drove all the way to Kansas City, 5.5 hours away from our house to go to Kansas City. And the whole time I'm just like, okay, I'm not going to check find my friends every 5 seconds. I'll do it once an hour. Like, you know what I mean? Because I was not brave enough to take that kind of a trip that young. Like I was just, well, and quite frankly, she started driving a little bit around the same time I started driving, as far as like distance from age to now. And so like I was 18 when I started driving too. And I don't know, it's just crazy to me that she was brave enough to go, her and her two roommates were brave enough to go all the way to Kansas City to IKEA. I would have been freaking out going to Omaha by myself. You know what I mean? Like,
that's so funny. Well, and you touch on something that we can't unpack here because I know we're getting ready to wrap this up, but I think it's important to say is that open hand that you do let your kids go with. I've witnessed that firsthand for me, that my parents with an open hand kind of let us go when it was time. And I appreciated that. And it kind of validated that they understood that torch is being passed. And in fact, I'll never forget this. It was my 18th birthday, and my parents took me to a Chinese restaurant, and they were sitting down and we ordered. And if you know my parents, and I've kind of expressed a little bit of, the strong parenting, the strong personality, we ordered and then we handed the menus back. And then my parents kind of looked at me and said, well, we're done parenting you. And I'm like, what? And they're like, if you haven't figured it out, if you haven't learned what we've taught you by now, you're never going to learn it. But you know what? We're no longer going to parent you. You're an adult. You're going to be going off to college in the fall. They went through the whole, speech. And they said one of the most important things, which is, we're here if you need advice. We're here if you need help, but we're not going to impose that on you anymore. Like if you want help and our opinions, ask us. Otherwise, we're just going to kind of let you do your own thing. And I remember my first reaction was like, okay, I'm being punked. Like, are you serious? Like I was expecting them to let me make my first adult decision and then have them like come back and karate chop me like, hey, we didn't tell you to do this.
Right.
But I think as I got older and I looked back and I saw some other relationships, my wife was probably the best relationship that I got to see firsthand. The contrast when you are let go to become an adult with an open hand versus, when you're not. And again, I saw that with my wife. There was not an open hand to say, you are now an adult, go make your mistakes, be your person, have fun. We're here if you need us. And the difference between those two experiences were night and day. Mm-hmm. And again, I just wanted to kind of touch on that's what my wife and I are doing for our kids, which is going to be really hard. This is the first time we're going through it. But I think it's super important to be able to let them be the adults they want to be. I just wish it wasn't one day you're a kid, the next day you're an adult. But maybe we can touch on that in a future episode because I think that'd be really interesting.
Right. No, one day you have a kid and the next day you have a puppy, Mahlon. So just be ready.
No puppies for us. I think when we're empty nesters, I think we're going to take a breather because we've had pets and kids for, it'll be over 20 years at that point.
Yeah. Yeah, I took a breather. It was 2 whole weeks, and then we got a puppy. But no, I think the other something you said kind of tripped my trigger. One of the things that I think, recently, so my son has lost his keys and then got the spare set of keys. And I told him to, make a copy and bring it by so that he had a set if he needed it here. And he didn't. So he locked his keys in his car and he was locked out of his apartment. So he had to sit on his porch and wait for the locksmith. And literally like a week and a half later, he did it again, except his car was running and it was sitting outside my house. And I was like, son, had you gotten those keys made and brought them over, you would have this here, right? And he was like, well, I don't want you coming over to my house. And so thankfully, I didn't even think to have this conversation because it was completely out of my thought process. So I had it with both of my kids and I told them, I said, look, my door is open to you anytime. You are welcome here anytime. This is your home. And anytime you need to come over, anytime you need something, if you need some ketchup, just call me and try not to take the whole bottle. It's fine. But I'm not coming to your house unless I'm invited. That's your space. So I would not assume an invitation to your home. You putting a key on the hook over here so that you have it if you need it isn't me feeling like I have the ability to come to your house anytime I want to. And so even as we're continuing to progress through this, I'm learning that I really do have to kind of set some of those expectation and definitions for them, because I don't know that they're that they're getting, that this is a one-way door. You can come in here anytime you want. That doesn't mean that I'm just going to take advantage of and come into your space whenever you want. That's an invitation. But they've also seen that with even my dad. Like he comes over when he's invited, but I can go to his place anytime, So I guess I kind of assumed that, but sometimes we still have to be pretty intentional about those things and remind them of that. I love that idea of open hand, like letting them go with an open hand. I love that concept, and that's exactly. It really does describe what I've tried to do with my kiddos too. I'm supposed to stop saying kiddos on the podcast. People close to me have told me it's annoying. So that's what I've tried to do with my children as well.
With my adult children.
Anyway. All
right. Well, I know we've covered a lot, and I liked having this conversation. And it's kind of interesting to just think through some of this, because I think, I'm not going to go into it, but even the last bit that you just said, we could probably start talking the contrast between, as you're an adult, you have your own space, versus as a child, you have your parents' space that you get to live in. So it's like, even then, I could see where kids would be, I have my own place. I don't want to give you a key because it's my space. I finally have my own space. I want to say who can come in and come out. But yeah, it's just that whole rights and responsibilities as a child. It's a very interesting conversation. So
I'm so excited for you, because this is coming fast for you. And it really is, it's really cool how that relationship with our adult kids shifts. So I'm kind of excited that you're getting close to that space, because even having my daughter live with me for a year past 18 when she had to, when she could have moved out, and my son too. Hannah stayed a little longer than my boy did, but it's interesting to me how cool the relationship got, and how I got to know her in a different way and him in a different way, and they got to know me in a different way too, because it wasn't the same dynamic. So it's kind of an interesting thing, and I'm excited you're getting there with your daughter too.
Yeah, we raise all of our kids to be free thinkers and independent, but at the same time, this is the first chance we get for them to actually start capitalizing on that independence we've said we want them to have. So again,
and the first time you get to deal with the independence you gave them.
Yes. Well, and I think once it sits in my mind that this isn't just a temporary thing, that she's going to become a responsibility of mine again. I think once I get into my head, no, you've raised her to be an independent woman. You've raised her to make her own decisions. And guess what? Now this is her life going forward. It's not ever going to be another space, which makes me sad. Like I'm almost going to tear up here. It's sad to think that that time with her is done. But at the same time, it's so exciting to see who she's becoming as an adult and as a young woman. And I am looking forward to that relationship being there, where she wants to have a relationship with us, not because we're her parents and we provide everything for her, but because she's actively interested in my wife and I, and she wants to be part of our lives rather than she has to be part of our lives. So I am looking forward to that. But anyways, I'm getting way off topic, but that's something I'm working through. I'm coming.
Your daughter's about to have all of her rights and responsibilities here in a few days. Like, it'll be a few minutes and you'll be there. So
yeah.
What a good topic to land on today, Mahlon. Thank you.
Yeah, it was good. All right. Thank you very much. I've listened to this other podcast, and they always do like a Midwestern, better get going, because people that are from the Midwest, they say goodbye 30 minutes before they actually say goodbye. So it's like, well, it's getting about that time now. I don't want to take their ending like they do, but I just thought that's kind of funny.
And it's so true.
It is.
Oh my goodness, it's terribly true. But anyway, this has been fun, and we will catch you again next time. And thank you all for joining us on Roundtable Mindset. We'll see you again next time.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. This podcast was recorded and edited by Jamie and Mahlon. Music by Famous Cats. If you have a topic you'd like us to discuss, please email us at roundtablemindset@gmail.com. Text or call us at 402-819-8999 or join the conversation on Facebook at Roundtable Mindset Podcast.
And never miss a new episode by making sure you like, subscribe, and share wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for being our guest today. See you next time at the Roundtable. And remember, your opinions and perspectives matter and are appreciated, but might not always be shared by others, and that's okay.